Hello, I'm Justin from Fig. I'm going to be talking about crowdfunding. So specifically the past, present, and future. First, just a little bit about me. And by the way, don't be shy if you want to come up and get a little closer. It's a nice, cozy event. So I was the a founder of Fig. I was previously a COO at Double Fine. I ran the Greenlight Committee at 2 Asian publishers before that. And then even way before that, I was my first job was at Babbage's Software, which got acquired by GameStop, so now GameStop. And then probably the interesting fact for me is that I was 12 when Metroid came out on the NES, and at that point, I was a god. I was like the most popular kid in my school. It was 6th grade, and then 2 years later, everybody moved off games, and I was still infatuated with them, and so I was not anymore. But Justin Bailey is the famous code for Metroid, so that was really cool to re-experience that when the NES Classic came out this holiday. So just one interesting thing to start with is, have you noticed when games get crowdfunded, for some reason, a large number of them have campfires? If you've noticed this phenomenon, but they do. It's like they're sitting around a campfire. And like even like the first game on Fig was Outer Wilds, and it's actually about camping in space. So just interesting note there. But one thing it ties into is my speech is going to be more about like tribal knowledge that I'm sharing with everybody. There's a lot of reasons for this. Reliable data is very hard to come by in the crowdfunding space, especially like the early days of Kickstarter. There's also a practice, Kickstarter, when campaigns fail, they de-index it. And then Indiegogo doesn't really release their numbers, and you can actually completely remove your campaign if you want to. So that makes getting something, getting hard numbers hard. So. But anyway, let's start real quick with kind of the crowdfunding environment. This is as for video games. If I put every crowdfunding platform up here, it would be like logo soup. But let's just start. So everybody knows like rewards and perks. It's like the donation and charity side of crowdfunding. So that's Kickstarter, of course, Indiegogo. I would classify that into 2 major categories, and I'll get to later why this is really important. But there's the all or nothing model, and there's the flexible goal and flexible time model as well, which Indiegogo practices. And then we got subscription. So Patreon's a little newer on the scene. Probably won't talk about them much except for just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to spend more time on the investment side because that is definitely the newest kids on the block. So Fig is a hybrid. So we both do reward-based crowdfunding, and we also do investment in the revenue streams of the game. That's an important distinction. I will get to that on the next slide. There's also microventures and Gambitious. So to break those down just a little bit more, so microventures that's a collaboration with Indiegogo. So they take all investments. They use Title III of the Jobs Act, which is really important in the U.S. It allows them to raise up to $1 million. People are actually investing in the studio, and the security is actually the game studio security. That's important because there's a whole host of regulatory things they need to comply with, including accounting. I'm just going to state it. I think this is a really bad idea. And there's a reason for the studio side. If you're really good at making games, you should concentrate on making those games. And like the accounting and financial stuff, the sophistication that's required, it's a real burden on a studio. So there was a GDC talk that the head of Crowfall did on his experience. So it's really informative. But on the other side of things, as a consumer, what you have to do is you have to wait for an exit, which usually happens, 1% to 2% of the time for a game studio. And when that happens, it usually takes between 7 and 10 years. So you start to see these laws were actually put in place to protect consumers that weren't sophisticated enough for investments like this. Now, these investments, you need an incredible amount of sophistication. You need to have a diversified portfolio. You need to be able to wait a long amount of time to get your return. And then, add to that, you need to be able to lose all your money on every single investment. And so that just doesn't check the box for most of us. Gambitious is a little different. So they do accredited only, so rich people. They do private campaigns, but they do investments like we do, where they sign a licensing agreement with the developer and you're investing in the revenue stream. Which brings us to us. To me, it was very important in the foundation of Fig. One of the reasons I founded it is because there actually wasn't a solution that would allow everybody to invest. And I thought the real opportunity is with the fan investors, of which I am a non-accredited investor. So I wanted to be able to invest in the revenue streams of these games. And I think that really fixes the narrative with crowdfunding. And I wanted to be public. Like, that was important too. So that's the difference between what I would call these three platforms that are being used right now for games. Now, this next slide, I'm going to theme my talk on Ultima, and the reason why is because I love Ultima. It was a really fun game, and I grew up with it, and so yeah. And then also it ends up, if you take the time horizon that Ultima was developed under, it's actually kind of the time horizon for crowdfunding. And it actually fits pretty well into these different ages that were defined by Ultima. So Ultima 1 and 3 were the Age of Darkness. Ultima 4 to 6, yes, 4 to 6, math still works in Poland, is the Age of Enlightenment. And then 2015 to 2017 is our current age of Armageddon. So before we dive in, just backing up even before 2009, which is where crowdfunding started. And that is actually back, the practice of crowdfunding in 19th century New York actually happened with plays, where people who wanted to put on a play would actually go out to the surrounding neighborhoods. They would sell revenue shares in the play. And then when the play happened, based on the ticket sales, they'd pay back those producers or patrons. So that happened. And then another way that crowdfunding was used is authors on their websites right around 2000 were putting up their books, and they'd say, hey, if you want me to write more chapters of this book, hey, my community, I couldn't find a book publisher, so if you can pay my basic the basic necessities I need, I'll make another chapter. And so that happened, and a lot of authors actually used that to create their books, and then they were actually able to find publishers. And then 2008 came, and the first major crowdfunding platform was established, and that is Indiegogo. So now heading into the first era. So Kickstarter was founded in 2009. They did an all or nothing practice. Which is great. They, at that time, were doing slightly better than Indiegogo. They're pretty neck and neck, though. We'll get to what changed in just a second. But at that time, companies were raising on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. The really successful big campaigns were raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they had 1,000 backers or so. Also, in the U.S., the Jobs Act was being discussed in Congress. And that was allowing investment. So then Tim went to Kickstarter and did Double Fine Adventure, and that was the fastest campaign. It got to $1 million in under 24 hours. It was the first multi-million-dollar success on Kickstarter. It made worldwide news and really set the narrative for the whole platform. I went back and just rewatched the video, and he really sold Kickstarter in a way with a narrative that I don't even think Kickstarter had come up with at the time, and people responded. One other interesting note for history is, as good ideas what often happens is multiple people have them at the same time. So Brian Fargo was actually planning his crowdfunding campaign about the same time that Tim did. It just got delayed a little bit. And who knows, if he had actually launched Wasteland 2 just a month or two earlier, then the whole news would have been him, and the story would have been how he set the narrative. And so that brings us, the stage is set. Now, there's regularly multi-million-dollar crowdfunding campaigns happening. The order of magnitude has changed. The big successful campaigns are raising in the millions and have tens of thousands of backers. Interesting little side note here is the majority of Kickstarter's revenue is coming from video games, which is a subcategory of games. it's still a subcategory of games. So if you look at that, all those are all the major categories of Kickstarter. This is very similar to Indiegogo, by the way. There's this, if you're reading some of the stories about Kickstarter, it's actually interesting. When they were forming, there was a lot of controversy about including games in the first place because it was not an official art form. And so they did, and then this really great result happened in the subcategory of video games. Am I a slide behind? There we go. Okay. So then the peak of crowdfunding is what I'm going to call it happened, at least as far as Indiegogo and Kickstarter are concerned. Shenmue 3 launched on E3 stage. It was like, oh my God, that was huge. Actually, it's a beautiful game. I had the fortune to actually visit them last week when I was in Japan. I visited WiseNet. Game looks great, but the whole narrative, it was a very successful campaign, but the whole narrative of a major publisher, specifically Sony, using crowdfunding to fund a campaign and then them being the ones to profit off of it didn't go over too well. But it brings us to our current age. So I would call this, so that was the peak of reward-based crowdfunding. In the background here, the SEC is passing what's called Title IV of the Jobs Act, which is what FIG uses. And then we launched FIG. I actually got the funding for FIG right before that Shenmue 3 news happened. Then the narrative changed a little bit. So, some games were being delivered that did not live up to expectations. There were other big crowdfunding campaigns that had very high-profile people attached that were failing. There was, 2016. It looked like crowdfunding had declined a huge amount. I want to come back to that because I don't actually think it's declined when you see some numbers breaking it down. And then even I think it's just last week, an article came out, questioning the viability of Kickstarter. And the data seems to support it. So if you look at In Exile, obviously Brian is one of the best at using crowdfunding. He has, his first campaign raised $3 million. A few years later, he did Torment, broke all records, raised $4 million. And then the last campaign around Kickstarter, pretty huge dip. So it did $1.5 million. Same with the backers. You'll actually see there, pretty huge decrease in backers. It's not just him. If you look at Banner Saga, that was actually, did about $700,000, the first one. Banner Saga 3 did just over half that with only about 40% of the backers. So real big decrease. Going to apologize real quick because I'm going to drain the slide. So crowdfunding fatigue is what I'm going to say is the problem that's happening here. And this is, I'm going to use some speculation here. It's by no means scientific. Definitely there's going to be some anecdotal parts of this. So, but the data I've seen suggests that the higher tiers have been drying up for the last few years, where people used to throw down $1,000 and they'd get dinner with the developer or a party or something. That's not happening anymore. People aren't participating in those tiers. There's actually an interesting thing. I've talked to a few people that thought they were actually investing by using Kickstarter. This is not helped by the fact that I go to crowdfunding panels sometimes and I see lawyers actually referring to the investment you make on Kickstarter. So, but you're not, obviously. Everything you do with Kickstarter or Indiegogo or even FIG when you're doing on this side is charitable donation when you do the perk reward side. And then transparency with partners. It's been a problem when there's been publishers in the background or investors that are undisclosed and are profiting off of people who are supporting through charity. And then I think probably the worst thing that has led to crowdfunding fatigue is the correlation with the actual budget and the campaign goal. Specifically to say there basically is none. A lot of times when developers are figuring out what goal to go with, they are engineering backwards what they think they can get and then reducing that so that they can get a multiple on top of that to get press coverage. So, which leads me to my next point, which is there's not as much press coverage anymore because the press, well, they're very smart, and when they see stuff like that happening, they don't tend to, let that happen or cover it. So, there's definitely been a diminishing returns on Twitter is not what it used to be. So, but if you go through like Reddit and Facebook and YouTube, still Facebook's doing amazing. I'll take it out of the list, but other ones like their impact on video games and being able to get the word out is not what it used to be. And then success has actually been something as well. So if you take the top 50 games that are crowdfunded, you'll see they've raised close to $50 million. This next part is a extrapolation on my part because sales are not public. But extrapolating the sales using Steam Spy and some other things, we can see that those games made about $500 million. So the whole idea with Kickstarter is the name actually does fit really well, which is it's this one-time tapping into your community, into their goodwill. And so once you get that and you're successful, the thought is you would use those proceeds to fund future projects, not go back and continue to get free money. And so that's the narrative that was set up when Tim did his first video was crowdfunding. This is a way for creators to get money from their fans. And that's where it ended. And then I do think there's unrealistic expectations by developers in the industry. So when you build up a brand, you want to build up a bunch of goodwill around that brand. So the way we think of Indiegogo and Kickstarter in some ways, we think of it as hey, wouldn't it be great if it's a way to discover games and then to dip into other people's communities for them to give me charitable donations of money that I never have to return. So that's a lot to ask for a platform that goes across many, many industries. So what Kickstarter and Indiegogo are, and most crowdfunding platforms, are they're a way for you to organize your community that already exists. And they're a brand that's attached to that. So, and so looking at the current state of things, if you looked at Project Rap Rabbit, Sony once again went back to crowdfunding. Not surprisingly, with just the narrative of charitable donations, it has not gone over that well. That project looks like it is probably not going to succeed. These are actually some of the nicer comments. And then Ashes of Creation actually is going to be is very successful, but when you look at this, this one has some negative comments as well. And if you look at the frequently asked questions on this page, you'll actually notice they actually already have the full budget of the game through investors. And so those investors, then once again, they're using Kickstarter for selling subscriptions to their fan base. So, and that's not being received too well. At this point, I'm going to have to make a disclaimer, which is my objectivity is about to be completely lost, which is I'm about to talk about Fig. So when I formed Fig, I did so with the advisors Tim Schafer, Brian Fargo, Fergus Urquhart, Alex Rogopoulos of Harmonix. I've been working with them for years, and we've been helping each other out, and we wanted to figure out how can we make this sustainable. We had the data years ago that we knew where the trends were going to be going, and we knew that narrative of just getting charitable donations was not going to work long term. And I think everybody was really appreciative because they actually, at that time, they actually needed that money to make these games possible. It's no joke. The publishers would not fund those games. But now these studios are making money. They have revenue streams, and what they want us to do is bigger and more ambitious projects. And the way they want to do it is, we saw the evolution of crowdfunding happening, where if you added the component of a way fans could actually get money back from the creators that they support, that's something people wouldn't get tired of. And so if you're looking at this, did our assumption prove out? Well, if we go back to that graph, we'll look at Wasteland 3. It's back to just a little bit over 2012 levels. Most of that actually coming from people buying game shares. And then if you look at the crowdfunding space for the top 10 games, Fig has the top 3 video games since we launched. But if you also look at this, a large portion of the money that used to be a Kickstarter, a material amount has actually started to go towards Fig and towards Gambitious. And so if you add all that together, the Fig, Gambitious, Indiegogo, and Kickstarter, you see it's actually about level with what it was in 2015 for 2016. One thing to point out here, and this is an interesting ratio that's held pretty consistent across all of our games, is whatever you can actually raise with rewards, we're seeing the ability to raise 2 to 3 times that by doing investment. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about, we had our own hiccups. SECs, we had to go through a review to get the base structure, and so we had a lot of early momentum, and it ground to a halt as we had to focus completely on getting that SEC qualification completed. At the time, I knew I had enough money to make the games that we had already gone through to make sure they had the money they needed, but I would not sign up any other games unless I knew that was going to be the case. So much to the chagrin of my investors, I put a halt on it. The good news is we got it qualified, and we're back off again. So in that, if you look at the current campaign, Snapshot Games, so Julian Gollop, the creator of XCOM, this is one of his previous crowdfunding campaigns. He raised $210,000 from 5,000 backers. This campaign is still live right now on Fig. He's gone over 636,000 and about 8,500 backers with still 14 days to go. So you can see, pretty consistently 2 to 3 times once you take an investment, the potential of a raise. It was very interesting. One last note about this, because I've had this conversation a lot with developers, is the number one thing happens is they say, oh, well, hey, Kickstarter, whatever you can get on Fig, I can get equally that amount on Kickstarter because there's this whole organic ecosystem that's evolved around it. So I have actual data. I can't argue with emotions because people do make up their minds based on emotions, but it was true that when Fig first launched, we were having about a 30% discount on rewards. But this current campaign and other campaigns have shown what we are doing is accumulating data as we run campaigns. And so all that data that used to actually come from Kickstarter that went directly to the studios, basically all the marketing data that they established, we've actually been accumulating, and we run marketing campaigns against our campaigns when they're running, and actually hold that data for when the game launches to help it do better sales. So now we're actually at 30% higher on rewards than what people are seeing on other crowdfunding platforms. So you'll see that down there. The green is actually just the rewards. So they've raised $357,000 in rewards, already eclipsed their previous total. Okay, done with the Fig stuff. So let's look into the future. And going back to my Ultima analogy, Ultima, the games 4 and 7, those are my personal favorites. I thought those were huge standouts. But then, it went all the way to 9, 8 and 9. If you haven't played the series, I just say just go up to 7. Maybe don't spend time with 8 and 9. Interesting little tangent just for a second is King's Quest II was one of my favorite series growing up, and it also had 3 and 6 were amazing. It had 8 games in the series, and you probably shouldn't play the last 2 games. But regardless, what happened with Ultima is it inspired these other amazing franchises that came out. You can World of Warcraft, you can suggest has some inspiration from Ultima, obviously Skyrim, and then even Ultima maybe even evolved into Ultima Online. So what does that mean when we take this analogy and we compare it to Kickstarter? So, well, you have Fig and Gambitious. We have those already. Kickstarter Online? No, probably not. So Star Citizen So, one of the things I think you'll see with crowdfunding is I think you're going to see these campaigns change. I think the structure that worked for Kickstarter, that worked across all these different industries, is great, and it worked for us until now. But I do think the potential that Star Citizen has shown about continuing to have a campaign that goes on shows a lot of potential to potentially getting up there. We could fund AAA titles, AA titles. The one tweak I would make to that is I do think there should be investment so that there is the transparency and accountability that goes along with that. Oh, and there's going to be Kickstarter too, because they're really strong, and it's actually a pretty good place to fund games. So what else might evolve is crowd publishing. Now that's where I think things are heading. Is like, you look at crowdfunding, like we've been talking just about the funding part right here, and if you look at all the functions that a publisher basically maintains, like they figure out which titles, they usually do this behind closed doors, they figure out which titles to fund, they fund them completely off their balance sheet, and then of course they control the development, and the creative control resides with the publisher. One thing I'm excited about is this idea of getting the community more involved with the publishing aspect. As a matter of fact, centering the publishing aspect around them. So it doesn't exist yet, but if you can imagine, like the community is the one that's actually deciding what actually becomes the campaigns that get funded. You have the developers, they're creatively empowered, but checking in with the community, and they're required to give budget and timeframes, like updates if the game's delayed. And then that same community having a vested interest in this game performing well is actually helping with the promotion of it as well. And then getting returns from that they can continue to invest in their favorite projects, or my hope with other indies, other aspiring developers who have interesting concepts. And to see the potential of that, I would just point to, in the film industry, if anybody has seen The Blacklist, I think it was really cool, because you had this Hollywood agent, very frustrated with how things were going in Hollywood, thought there was amazing screenplays that were getting overlooked, decided to put a website up and just take all those scripts and put them on the website. From that, we've seen amazing results. So it's hard to read here, but 4 of the last 6 best pictures actually came from that list. And that's what happens when I think you enable this creative risk-taking. And we need to see that. And crowdfunding really does that. And so, in crowdfunding, crowd publishing, those things, I think we need to make sure it's viable and it's another source of funding that continues to exist. So I have a little bit of time. I want to talk through some of the resources I used to put this together, just so you can see some of my data is coming from. So NeoGAF, I'm going to totally mess up this name. Stumpo Pow. Anyway, he's got a Google spreadsheet, and it shows basically all the crowdfunded games. It shows where they are in development, and he keeps track of them. It's actually a surprising number of them actually do deliver, and deliver to a high quality. Obviously, there's Wikipedia. They have some good stats. It's not a complete list, though. There's somebody in France, I believe, that has this mystery spreadsheet, which basically has, it looks legit. It has all the crowdfunded games on there since 2009. This is somebody, whose is this? Somebody in the audience? Does anybody know who this is? Oh God, yeah. I'll send. I can send this to you guys. I have my email at the end too. And then, so some of the data I was using was ICO Partners. So Thomas has that. So he's got some great data, has broken it down, has actually scraped some good data as well. KickTracks obviously is good. The URL FigTracks I already grabbed. So, and then me. Please feel free to reach out to me. Twitter handle is Justin Bailey 12D, or my email up there. So I think I saved enough time for
any questions.
Oh.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I am wondering if Fig is also helping in crowdfunding technology apps for creating games, or only games?
Are you asking if Fig will go outside of video games one day?
Yes.
Yeah, I do think I think there needs to be a fundamental change to publishing, and I think having the community surrounded by it is something very interesting. I also think that you need, whenever you go outside of certain verticals, you need to have industry expertise, especially when you're taking investment. So nobody on the team has any other experience besides video games right now. There have certainly been people who have approached us with interest in doing other forms of entertainment.
Yeah, well, I'm talking more about, for example, creating tools, an application for creating some tool which is being used by game studios, for example.
Yeah, no, we're more likely to partner with that. And that's something we're also doing too, is just we're getting lists of like preferred vendors we've worked with, standardized terms on distribution, all the type of things that we can just help a developer out with to make their jobs easier.
Okay, one more.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My question is, are you willing to share with us what percentage of pitches become projects on Fig? And maybe as a follow-up for that, because you showed a screen of the future, and that was Kickstarter in the end and Fig, and if you continue your business model as today, is there room for another one, which is basically what you do, but without the strict curation?
Yeah, so one thing we'd love to get the community more involved with is the greenlight process. We're testing that out already. So one thing we've done is Phoenix Point, that actual game. I didn't mention this, but I'd love to take a chance to mention it now. Our email list is actually 80,000 people have signed up for it. Kickstarter has 60,000 in their games list, which includes board games. So we were able to take that list, and there's about 10,000 people that signed up for what we call the First Look Club. And so Phoenix Point, before it even launched, we did a private campaign on it to get some data, and we just used those 10,000 people. We just sent it out to them, gave them access, exclusive access to it, and it went bonkers. Got $50,000 in 24 hours just off a small subsection of our list, and we knew it was going to probably perform very well. Does that answer your question? So the thought is that, you know, if we have private campaigns and we have these people that have actually supported other projects, can we start to utilize them? And this idea that, like, when I first got into video games, when I first came to the video game industry, before I was actually like TV film, that was like 10 years ago. I got in there, the publisher I was with was like, hey, you know, you're supposed to run corporate development, but we're not going to acquire any studios, so why don't you run this greenlight thing? And like I saw hundreds of pitches come through. Ended up evaluating like thousands of pitches. Why I was in that function, and it was really entertaining. It was like amazing creative work that was coming up that I would see. And the way the pitch committee worked was it had to be unanimous. And so somebody from like marketing would nix a project based on their own personal consumption, and it just drove me nuts. So I would see that. So I've always been looking at ways like, can we make these 10,000 people that have signed up for this First Look Club, can we make it like a green light committee of 10,000? I don't have an answer yet, but that's some of the stuff we're looking into.
Other questions? Okay.
So regarding your blacklist example, not to poo-poo your comparison too much, but for like every Best Picture winner, there's like a blacklist script where it's a dark Willy Wonka prequel where he finds the Oompa Loompas in World War II, and sort of like come back to the comparison to crowdfunding. How many more like really bad ideas, like Mighty Number 9, like public failures, can crowdfunding sustain before it sort of becomes like an industry joke, much like the blacklist has for the film industry?
Do you think the blacklist is a joke now?
Kind of, yes.
Okay, all right. That's a tough question to answer. You know, I think one of the things is there isn't much creative risk taking that's actually happening in the video game space. If you look at the publishers, they're definitely stuck in like a loop of sequelitis, and they're just continuing to fund the same things. And I think there will always be, when there's a outlet basically for new and fresh content, and that's why I want to protect crowdfunding so much, is that I think you'll see those new creative ideas. I mean, some of them are going to be crap. As a matter of fact, the majority are going to be crap. But you know, the really truly ambitious next major franchises are going to be part of those too. And you know, one of the things I want to do is, because we're doing investment, you have to figure out a way to curate it in a responsible manner, so it's not you know, too many failures go through the system. But one thing that's actually ended up happening with the funding side is, if you look at Kickstarter and you look at the data, and you know, I've been able to gather that data over the last like 3 to 5 years, is you would see whatever the campaign raises, you generally have about 2 to 3 times that as the market potential of what those games will do. And so Kickstarter has about a 17% success rate, at least in 2016, in video games they did. And so there's a lot of stuff that's just not getting funded. And we've even seen it on our platform, is like when you put something up there and we put it against our marketing list and we put it against like our investor lists, like if it's hot and it's a good game and really exciting, it gets funded, and it gets funded fast. And like everything we do is like, 700% ROI, 800% ROI. Our marketing is going bonkers. Our investors want to invest. But when it's not, it's definitely not. And there's nothing we can do to help that. So I think it's one of those things where, trusting in, 10,000 people, to come in and vote on something, you're actually going to see an early indicator, a signal of a desire for something to exist that hasn't existed before.
I guess as sort of a follow-up question, in the court of public opinion, I suppose, Ukulele recently came out, and that didn't exactly set the world on fire, and it's become something of like a meme amongst game enthusiasts to sort of like lump Ukulele or like Mighty Number 9, or in some cases Broken Age, into the same boat. And as we get closer and closer to like the collapse of crowdfunding as a viable funding platform, it seems like the only things that are viable are sequels or like something that reminds you of a game like Ukulele as a spiritual successor to Banjo. Like I can say as a reporter, the quickest way for me to totally discard an email from my inbox is like a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding link. But I'm more likely to cover games if there's some sort of connection to something that's come before. Do you think that sort of like that sequelitis or that sort of repetitive nature will eventually infect crowdfunding as it has the AAA space?
Well, I'm actually pretty excited with some of the titles we've seen. So, I mean, Outer Wilds was a completely new idea. That was funded through Fig, and then there's Kingdoms and Castles has done extremely well already, and it's like YouTubers are just picking it up, and so I do see, and that's one of the reasons why we've been trying to do big projects and small projects next to each other, is to let those big projects, sometimes which are sequels, to let the small projects draft off those big projects and potentially find like a new audience.
Cool. Thank you.
Someone else? Okay.
I have a really basic question about the investment side of FIG, because there is some law and regulation side about the investment. So the basic question is, can simply a company, a small company in Poland, registered in Poland, take part in this investment flow in PIG? And the second, can a simple gamer from Poland can take part in the FIG, because the different countries have different regulations, and countries want to protect the people against the bad investments. You know what I mean?
I do. So there's the two parts to the question. Let me start with the developer real quick, which is the developers actually, they sign a licensing agreement with us, which actually gives us a right to a revenue share. That's what we actually sell the shares against, is that rights to that revenue. But because it's a licensing agreement, like we can work with any developer in the world, so no limitations there. That's good. Now, every single country is different. That is true. So, and a lot of them do have this accredited, non-accredited. One of the things we've done is I hired an SEC lawyer who's just dealing with the SEC, but we also have other international lawyers who country by country are going out and figuring out all the rules for each of them. So, if you go to FIG right now, you'll notice like Germany, you can't invest. So, because the regulations are just too tight. And, we're collecting data on how many people want to invest in Germany. And if there's enough, then we'll go and actually do the legal work. So it's not insurmountable. So.
Confirming those regulations.
Sorry?
Okay. I understand that when it comes to the common people, gamers investing and other, you are investigating it in proportion of the potential of the market. Yes. So if some other countries, let's say China, it seems impossible. It's quite a joke. Would have a big potential. You would investigate that if it's the possibility to make those people a chance to take a part in investments.
Yeah, so the Nordic regions and Japan are surprisingly very open-minded to investment. So they let any of their population invest, which is great. So which is actually kind of nice because those regions have an incredible amount of talent as far as developers go too. So those have lined up. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Do we have any? Okay, Justin, thank you very much one more time.